What is up, Bell City Church? It is so good to be here with you this morning. If we haven't met yet, my name is Jeremy. I serve as the community pastor here at Bell City, and I'm just excited as we're going to continue our series in the book of Mark this morning. Does anybody remember the movie The Notebook? It was about 20 years ago. Men, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was a romantic movie. One I am positive that I watched, but I'm also very sure I fell asleep during. But that is not to say anything about the movie. I fall asleep just about during any movie, but this was a story about two young people who fell in love, Noah and Allie. And the movie just kind of follows along, but it kicks off with an elderly man reading out of a notebook, reading this story to a lady that's clearly in a nursing home. And he begins telling her this story about Noah, who was a poor country boy, and Allie, who came from money. And they fell in love one summer, and yet the world kept kind of pulling them apart. It's just a story of young love. It's a story of a summer romance of broken hearts. If you can picture the cover in your mind, it's kissing in the rain, right? As they come together. But towards the end of the movie, it's revealed that the entire thing has been a flashback. That the man reading this story was actually Noah, and the lady laying in the bed was actually Allie. And the heartbreaking twist of the movie is that Allie has dementia. And so she struggles to remember anything about this story as Noah reads from the notebook. He's hoping to remind her of shared moments, of things they did together. And the emotional kind of haymaker of the whole movie is as Noah's reading this, it finally dawns on Allie who the story is about. And she says, "This is us." It was a movie that was entirely about flashbacks. Well, this morning we're in Mark chapter 6. I'm going to invite you to turn there with me. Most of the words are going to be on the screen behind me, or you can find them as well in our app. But in the middle of this book of Mark, in the middle of Jesus' ministry, in the middle of Jesus performing all these miracles, we have a flashback. We have something take place. Now, it's not a flashback like the one in the notebook. It wasn't born out of love, but rather guilt, I think. So let's jump into it. Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 14. It says, King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that's why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. Now, the question being posed here is who is Jesus, right? They began to hear about all these things that Jesus had been doing. And so who is Jesus? This question is asked a few times in the Bible. Who am I, right? Jesus asked his disciples. And the answer is much like this one. Well, some say you're a prophet. Some say you're Elijah. But apparently there's some rumors going on that Jesus is John the Baptist. And this is the answer that kind of sticks in Herod's craw. And this is the moment we step into this flashback because Herod says, John the Baptist, I had him killed. I put him to death. And it seems like this is a moment actually of regret for Herod and a moment of fear. If this man is John the Baptist, it's John the Baptist resurrected from the dead because I had him killed. And so Mark begins to give us the backstory. And so verse 17, for Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. Now, we can find Herod all throughout the Bible, but where are you probably most familiar with Herod in the Bible? It's probably the Christmas story, right? That's where the wise men stopped. They spoke with Herod. Herod heard of this king that was being born, and so he decided that he was going to have any infant under the age of 2 put to death because of this threat to his kingdom. And so the Herod in the Christmas story is actually Herod the Great. The Herod in our story today is Herod Antipas, which is Herod the Great's son. And so we know a little bit more about Herod the Great, probably. And it's not shocking that Herod the Great had a great number of sons because he took 10 wives. He had a lot of wives. He had a lot of sons. His most famous wife, you probably have heard of, her name was Cleopatra. And so he had a big family, but we also know that he was ruthless. Clearly, he was willing to slaughter any babies, even at the hint of a threat to his throne. He would kill a lot of his political opponents. He would even kill, we know, at least one of his wives and several of his own sons. In fact, Caesar Augustus, the ruler of the Roman Empire, would joke that it is safer to be one of Herod the Great's pigs than one of his sons. Anything that threatened his power in any way, Herod the Great would be quick to knock down. And so this is the environment, this is the culture that Herod Antipas, the Herod that we are reading about today, was growing up in. It was an environment that was ruthless. And so after Herod the Great passed away, his kingdom was divided into 4 parts, and it was divided amongst 4 of his sons, one of which was Herod Antipas. So verse 17, it says, he did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And so this story becomes pretty twisted pretty quick. And so Herod Philip, another one of Herod the Great's son, had a wife, Herodias. Now, Herodias was not only Herod Philip's wife, she was actually the child of another one of Herod the Great's sons. And so this is his niece that has married his brother, and now she leaves her brother to go and marry Herod Antipas. Okay, so this, Jerry Springer couldn't make this up, what is happening in our story today. And so John the Baptist is walking around and he's saying things that seem pretty logical for a prophet to say, like things like, you shouldn't sleep with your brother's wife, especially while your brother's still alive. It seems to track with logic. But Herodias is not a fan at all of John's boldness. Now, there's a lot of things going on behind the scene here. And so Herod Antipas, he's referenced as a king in Mark, but he's actually not a king at all. Now, the Jewish people tend to refer to him as King Herod because he acted like one in a lot of ways. But Herod Antipas was not a king at all. He was a tetrarch, which just simply means he had a fourth of his father's kingdom. And so he would actually petition Caesar Augustus over and over again to make him a king, and he was denied. In fact, after some military faux pas, he would go to Caesar Augustus and he would ask that question again, and Caesar would be so aggravated with him that he stripped him of his rule entirely and set him off in exile. He and his ill-gotten bride were so power hungry and wanted all the things that came with power that it's really the driver behind what's going on in our story today. And so verse 19, it says, so Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came, and on his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guest. Now, I'm going to guess that you guys can read between the lines on this. We're not talking about a ballet when it says she came in and she danced for these men. This was not a court gesture kind of thing, or she's not twirling flags. This is sexual sin, clearly. This girl is Herod's own stepdaughter, also his great niece, and she's likely a young teenager in this story. And so what's really going on here is abuse. That's what's happening. And yet Herod was so pleased with what she did He says to the girl, "Ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." And so she went out and she said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" Now, this question makes it pretty apparent, doesn't it? Who was the driving force behind this whole event? I mean, it says Herodias saw the opportune time, and so she sends her own daughter to go dance before the king and his drunken party guest. And so Herodias' daughter goes and does just that, because Herodias knew where King Herod was weak. She knew she could attack him with the lust of his eyes. And so this girl goes and does this, and I have to imagine after she's finished, maybe she didn't want to do that at all. Likely she didn't, but as she comes out, well, at least I'm going to get something for this. Herod says, "I can have anything I want, up to half my kingdom, and I don't want to blow this opportunity." And so she goes and she asks her mother, "Well, what should I ask for?" Up to half his kingdom. And it's here that her mother's plan becomes very clear. This is the moment she had been waiting for. This was a calculated process. She's still holding this grudge against John the Baptist, and so she doesn't hesitate. She says, "The head of John the Baptist." Now imagine this young teenage girl being forced to go and do this, to go dance before these men, and now your mother is telling you, ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Think about that for a moment. What this girl must have lived with for the rest of her life, what her actions had led to, she was forced into, and yet she saw this take place. Did it stay with her for the rest of her life? Verse 25, she does as she's asked. At once, the girl hurried to the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she in turn gave it to her mother. And on hearing this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. There is a lot to unpack in this story, isn't there? There's these power-hungry fools. There's this family tree that looks like a stick. There's not a whole lot of branches going off of it. And if this was a movie that we were watching, man, we sat on the edge of our seat for an hour and a half, 2 hours, wondering what was going to happen, wondering how our boy Johnny B was going to get out of this situation. And you're here to tell me the bad guys win? He dies because of this? This isn't a movie I want to watch. And if we're not careful, we can read this and it's just another story in the Bible. But think about John the Baptist for a moment. Think as he sat in prison. Man, Jesus said he came to set the prisoners free. Hello, Jesus, I'm a prisoner. Here I am. And yet, things don't play out the way we would have anticipated them to. Let me ask you, what is it in your life that you have asked God about and things aren't playing out the way you would have chosen? What is it for you? Maybe, why isn't God saving my marriage? Why am I sick? Why did I lose my loved one? I think the question that begs to be asked in this story is, why didn't Jesus save John the Baptist? And I don't think I'm going to be able to answer all of that this morning. But I do think there are some deep truths that we can pull out of this story. The first one is this. If you're a note taker, this is your first fill in the blank in your bulletin. It's the small compromises lead to big consequences. I sure hope I spelled consequences right on the screen. If not, you can correct me afterwards. It's intriguing to me in the story, though. What did Herod think of John? Not a trick question. Did he hate John? It doesn't appear that he did. It says he was a holy and righteous man. He liked to listen to him. He even understood some of the truths, I think. But the problem started with what? It started with a compromise. It started with him taking his brother's wife as his own. It doesn't even appear that John wanted, or that Herod wanted to even arrest John in the first place. He only did so because of Herodias. In fact, she wanted to kill him immediately, and Herod wouldn't allow it. And that's when she stoops as low as any mother could. And in Herod's sin of taking his wife, another sin is born. He's overtaken by lust. He doesn't want to kill John, and yet another sin is born. He's made this promise in front of all these people. His pride now stands in the way of him doing what was right. And now he asks himself, well, what choice do I have? I've gotten this far. I've shared this story before with some of you, but in front of my house is a big, long ditch that I have to weed eat. It's about an hour and a half worth of weed eating, and I don't like to do that at all. And so I always try to get my mower just as close to the ditch as I can without getting stuck. But I'm pretty good at getting stuck. And so it's not an uncommon occurrence, but there was a time, it was last year or the year before, it was one of those times where you get home late from a sporting event for your kid or whatever, and the grass is too high, and so I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get it knocked out. And so it's almost dark. I have my lights on my mower, and before I know it, I'm too close to that ditch, and I'm stuck. Now, normally I just go get my quad, or I call my in-laws and have them bring something over. But I decided it's late. I'm just going to yank this thing out. I'm going to go get my truck. I got my truck and I drove it down where my mower was stuck. Now, my truck is a big, heavy diesel truck. And so no more do I get down there, and it is beginning to sink. And so I learned quickly from my mistakes, so I rocked it back and forth as much as I could until I was completely sunk all the way up to the hubs. And eventually, I had to call some friends, and they had to bring out the tractor to pull out my truck so that they could begin to pull out my mower. You see, sin can and often does work that way. I've looked for who to contribute this quote to, but I couldn't find who to attribute it to, but I bet you've heard it. It says, sin will take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. What it means is these small compromises that we begin to make can add up to big consequences. You ever bought something that you thought you were getting at one price only to find out it was going to cost you something different? Maybe you go in and you're buying a new vehicle, and this is the sticker price, and then when you sit down, the dealer starts stacking on all these fees, and the next thing you know, you're $3,000 higher. Or maybe you sign up for an introductory rate on that streaming service for $5.99, and you're going to cancel it after 30 days, and then 6 years later, you're still paying $17.99 a month because you've never canceled it. Sin shows up a little bit like that. It promises one thing and it leads to another. It promises freedom. It looks like fun. Man, I want to do that. It looks a lot of times, doesn't it, like just this once. I'm going to do this just this once and I'll never do it again. Or nobody's going to know. I can handle that. I've got a grasp on what's going on. And I think too often the problem becomes we ask, how close can I get to sin? How close can I get and it not actually be sin? When the question we should be asking is, how holy can I be? How far can I step back from that? Small compromises lead to big consequences. Nobody sets out, I don't believe, to wreck their marriage. Nobody sets out to become an addict. Nobody plans on being bitter or numb or angry or ashamed, but sin is slippery, and one compromise quickly becomes two. One little secret quickly becomes a lifestyle. One glance somewhere you shouldn't be looking becomes an obsession. Moments of pride can become years of isolation. James 1 writes it this way in verse 14. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Ever see that play out in your life? Man, you just start to think about that thing. You just kind of ponder it for a little bit. And the more you do that, the closer you get to it, and the next thing you know, you're stuck in the mud. The problem is we rarely notice that we're drifting or how far we've drifted. That's why scripture constantly calls us, like in 1 Peter chapter 5, to be alert and sober-minded. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around looking for someone to devour. So resist him. Stand firm in your faith. And much like Herod in our story, I think a lot of people's collapse begins with one small compromise. Can I ask where you're compromising? Can I ask what you're looking at that you know you shouldn't? Can I ask who you're talking to that you know you shouldn't? Maybe it doesn't feel like a big deal. But it's this very thing that begins our whole story in our text today. It's the very thing that gets John into hot water. You know, I would venture to guess that if John left one sentence out of his message, he'd have lived a much longer life. If he'd have just let that go. But what we see is that speaking truth will often come with opposition. John knew the danger of allowing that compromise, of allowing sin to take root, and so he speaks out against it. And we've seen this play out in our life, haven't we? That speaking truth will come a lot of times with opposition. You've heard the saying, "Don't shoot the messenger," right? Why do you think that's a saying? Somebody was taking shots at the messengers, and so what do? We tend to stray away from that, don't we? The thing about us, though, is we do a pretty good job of, we call it love and acceptance. And because of that, we are tempted to tiptoe around sin. Especially in today's culture, we're tempted to tiptoe around sexual sin, aren't we? There's a cause not to speak out against that. There's a temptation to not speak out against certain things like even abortion, something barbaric and vile, because, well, I'm not going to mix my politics with my religion or my religion with my politics. I'm going to keep those things separate. I'm not going to talk about that. And if we're not careful, what we begin to do is water down the truth to the point that it is no longer truth. And then we as a church have the audacity to call it love. And it's the opposite of love. Listen to me, church. It is the opposite of love to look someone in the eye who is in danger of an eternal judgment in hell and give their sin a wink and a nod because you're afraid of what they might think of you. That's not love. It's the opposite. You know who I have no problem telling they're wrong? A couple of them can raise their hand in here. I knew you would. I have no problem telling my kids they're wrong. None. Now, I don't always do it perfectly. I could do it better a lot of times in a lot of ways, but I have no problem when I see them doing something that is not to their benefit to let them know that. You want to know why? Because I love them. Because I want what's best for them. Now listen. I'm not asking you to go stand on the street corner and scream at passerbys about how they're going to hell. Will we speak the truth absolutely in love, seasoned with a little salt? But I'm afraid that too often we hide our cowardice under the guise of love. I didn't put this in your note sheet, but maybe right down there, right beside it, sin breaks the heart of God. You see, we could look at this story and you can question, did Jesus even care about John the Baptist? Isn't that a logical question in this? Did he even care? He had the power to do something about this, didn't he? Did he even care that he was going to die? Let's look at Luke chapter 13, and we see where Jesus runs up against Herod again. Luke chapter 13, beginning in verse 31. It says, "At that time, some Pharisees came to Jesus and said to him, 'Leave this place and go somewhere else. Herod wants to kill you.' Jesus replied," this is Jesus speaking about Herod, "You go tell that fox, I'll keep on driving out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day, I will reach my goal. In any case, I must press on today and tomorrow and the next day, for surely no prophet can die outside Jerusalem." Jesus wasn't scared of Herod, but I believe that he remembered what he had done to John, to his family, to his friend. And then in Luke 23, we see again Herod and Jesus come together in verse 8. This is moments before Jesus' death. It said, "When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him." Why do you think Herod was greatly pleased when he saw Jesus? I think it's because he finally answered the question, was this John the Baptist resurrected? He laid eyes on him and he knew this was a different man. That's what I think. And so, from what he had heard about him, Herod, he'd hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. Jesus wouldn't even respond to him. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they'd been enemies. Jesus treated Herod as if he had no authority whatsoever. He said, "You don't command me." But he did grieve the actions taken by him. If you look in Matthew chapter 14, that's where Matthew records the death of John the Baptist. We see this in verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by a boat. He heard about the death of John. He withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Why do you think Jesus did that? Why did he remove himself from the crowd and go someplace alone? I think it's clear he was grieving. He was grieving the death of John, what had taken place. I think it's likely he went there and he cried. And yet the stunning part of the gospel happens in the next breath. The same Jesus who is grieved over sin steps into a sinner's life. He withdrew to grieve, but in the next verse, he's returning to heal, to feed the crowds, to touch the broken. Listen, there are things going on in this world that absolutely grieves the heart of God. There are things in your life that seem unfair because they are unfair. Because we live in a broken world, because of the result of sin around you, there are things in your life that absolutely breaks the heart of God, and yet his purpose is still at work in your life. And that's a truth meant to bring you peace. God's plan will not fail. So the question is, did God cause this thing to happen in my life? No, God didn't cause that to happen. It wasn't part of his design. It's the result of sin entering the world through one man and living in all of us. But what it does mean is that sometimes God will use that broken arrow to hit the bullseye. John's death here in our story today was really a preview of a death to come. It was really a preview of Jesus' death. And if God can take what should have been the worst event in human history, if he can take the torture and the suffering and the death of his son, if we can look at that event that happened 2,000 years ago and have the audacity to call the day he died good, what is it in your life that he can't use for good? What is it he can't use? What is it he can't work out in your life? That's why in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul writes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." We sang a couple songs this morning that says, "He takes beauty from ashes." And the question I think that this story begs this morning is, what happens when we look around and all we see are ashes? I want to remind you that while we pray for, while we beg sometimes for a temporary healing, what God ultimately offers is an eternal promise. Do you know Jesus called John the greatest prophet? How could such a loving and pure and faithful servant of the living God meet his demise because of a lust-filled promise by a drunken king at his own birthday party, looking at his own stepdaughter, great niece, dancing in front of all these men? How could somebody so high and so holy be brought down in such a low and sordid way? That's the question we ask in our own life, right? How could God allow this to happen? Haven't I done the things I'm supposed to do? Why doesn't he take this away? Man, why do I see somebody over there healed and yet I continue to deal with this? And I got to tell you, I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes we get so focused on the here and now that we forget about God's eternal promise. Some years ago, my family, I think this was 2 summers ago, we had went and we'd met some friends at a fish fry in Ripley, Ohio. And there was a chance of storms that night, but it was around the time that there's always a chance of storms. And so we went there and we were eating, and while we were eating, the roof actually blew off of the building that we were in. And we just heard this incredible sound. Everybody is freaking out, and the roof is just gone off of this building. That kind of put a damper on the fish fry. And so we packed up the kids, and we're looking at the radar. There's another round of storms coming. And so, hey, we're about 35 minutes from home. Let's get moving. Now, if you've seen what I haul my kids around in, it is a high top conversion van, which is fantastic in a windstorm. It's like a rolling billboard going down the road. And so we're in that, and we begin to go, and the way home is closed because a power line had snapped in half, and there was an electrical line across the road. And so there's emergency vehicles everywhere, not allowing anybody to go. I said, "It's okay. I know a different way. We'll go that way." And so we begin to go that way. It's 5 or 6 miles down the road before we can make our turn. And we head a couple miles down that road, and there's a tree down. We've got to turn around. It's blocking the whole entire road. I decided, well, I'm going to go back the way we came. Maybe they've got that cleared. And as we get about 2 or 3 miles back, there's another tree down blocking our way from even getting there. I have no idea where I need to go now. So I'm trying to look on the map. And of course, it wants me to go the logical way because it doesn't know of all these blockages. And I've got my entire family in this van that is just rocking back and forth in these winds. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get everybody home? Now, if you'd asked me in that moment, do you think you're going to make it home? The logical part of my brain would have said, yeah, I mean, chances are a tree's not going to come down on us as we drive past it, wiping us all out. That's what the logical part of my brain would have said. But the emotional part of me was having a little mini anxiety attack. How do I get everybody home safely? I knew it was likely, but in the middle of that storm, I felt trapped. Most of us are okay with God's plan in our life, even if it entails some suffering, as long as it's the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego plan, right? You can throw me in the fiery furnace, God, as long as I don't get singed. We're okay with being Daniel in the lion's den. We could pet some cats for a little while, as long as you've sewn their mouth shut, God. We're okay with the story of David and Goliath because we know you got our back, God, and we slay that giant. Nobody much wants the John the Baptist plan. We want to be the one who's miraculously healed. We want to be the one who receives material blessing. I find it interesting. Turn with me real quick. These aren't going to be on the screen. Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 18. This is as John is in prison. And it says, John's disciples told him all about these things. Calling two of them, he sent them to the Lord. He sent them to Jesus. Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? When the men came to Jesus, they said, John the Baptist sends us to you and ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Now, we don't know John's intention in this, but I have to wonder for a moment, as John is sitting there in the prison, he's questioning, are you really the Messiah? Are you coming to save me? Look at what's going on. At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sickness, and evil spirits. He gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Jesus is quoting some prophecies about the Messiah. One is noticeably missing, about the one who sets the prisoners free. And this is his response to go tell John, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. I think Jesus' answer to John was, I'm not coming. Not on this side of heaven. And I wonder, did John sit in this prison and he hear the feet of the executioner come? Was he wondering, was this man coming to set me free or to slay me? God, I'm crying out. Let me ask you this. What happened to everybody that Jesus performed a miracle on in the Bible? Every one of them. They died. Even the ones that Jesus resurrected from the dead. Eventually, they died. Even if God answers every prayer that you have in the way that you want him to, death is still coming. Even if God delivers you at times from certain death with a miraculous deliverance, we still don't escape it. That's why we need God. Herod and Herodias may have received John the Baptist's head on a platter, but God received his soul in heaven, and that is the eternal promise you've been given. Romans 8, verse 18, and I'm going to close you with this final thoughts here. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, for the redemption of our bodies. For it's this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? We hope for what we do not yet have. We wait for it patiently. That last part's a little bit questionable. Sometimes we don't wait, do we? Very patiently. None of us escape death. And one day I myself will die. And my hope is that you mourn with those who loved me, but don't you dare pity me. Because when I die, it's not going to be a tragedy. No matter when or how it happens, it will not be a tragedy because I will cling to the cross all the way to a loving Father who is waiting to accept me with open arms. That's the eternal promise. And so when I die, I want to be laid in a casket with the biggest, creepiest smile on my face so that when you walk up to it, you're reminded that even though the temporary healing didn't come, that the eternal promise is fulfilled in my life that day. That's the hope we have. You know, one of the most haunting things in this story to me is how Herod thought of John, how he knew who he was, how he listened to the truth, even while imprisoning him, but he refused to surrender to what he knew. That's a dangerous place to live. Truth rejected does not become less true. What it becomes is more costly. So the greatest question in your life is not, will I suffer? It's not, will I get out of whatever is going on in my life? It is not even, will I die? The greatest question in your life is, how will you respond to the truth of who Jesus is? Father, we thank you for your word. Father, even when we read a story like John the Baptist and his death, and we don't know what to do with it, God, it's just a reminder of what we hope for, of what you've promised. God, may we not lose sight of that. May we not give up. May we not lose heart. Father, may we look at those around us and know the opposition may come. May we speak truth. May we not be afraid. Because we know of the love that you have for those in our communities, in our workplaces, in our schools. God, we thank you that no matter what is going on in our life today, that we know we're just foreigners in this land. This world is not our home. We're only passing through. We thank you for that and for your son, Jesus, who makes it possible. And it's in his name I pray. Amen.